child support agency, and they renamed it, and we all thought, well, nobody really thought it was all going to be right, but so yours is like a really long-term look into what's going wrong here. And this particular case involves Lee Windsor, started in 2008 when it was the CSA, and then obviously that was succeeded by the CMS in 2012. And so they mistakenly classified his service invalidating pension, or is it invalidating pension? I'm not sure about that.
So
Right, as an
yeah, so
occupational.
basically when he left service, yeah.
Right. And so that, and the problem is when they make a mistake, and I know this, they, rather than just address it and deal with it, they just seem to pile problems on top of that. And one of the things that you were saying is about people who have taken their lives. Now, I've heard these stories as well. So this is a terrible situation. It's already difficult, isn't it? When, parents separate, it's already difficult for the child. But when they're wrangling over money and money is being lost, I mean, in your understanding and what you've seen, is there anything that can be done with this agency, or does it need to be razed to the ground and started again in some way?
Well, I think it does. I don't see a way out from this problem for them. This has been going on since the late 90s, and there are two accounts stating all the way back to 97 and 98, which are just, still going, which are meant to have been stopped, which are collecting inflated arrears. And this isn't something that's kind of just me finding this out now. This has been said in oral hearings in Parliament for years. That there are seriously deep-rooted problems with the way that the CMS collects money, the way that it calculates things. And of course, their claim is that it's not as bad now as it used to be, but that's not really a defense. And actually, we saw a similar case, funny enough, over in the Netherlands, where their child collection service, which is a similar kind of body, did exactly the same thing for many, many years. They were collecting inflated arrears for a long time. That scandal actually ended up almost bringing down the government over there. So, this one is even bigger, I would suggest, because obviously we have a bigger population and there's even more use of this service over here. But if we take a look at the statistics, the mortality rate for paying parents is over 14 times higher than the national average. And we know that within that body, there are many suicides. Obviously, not all of those are verified to be as a result of the child maintenance service. But the Child Maintenance Service refuses to release its own data on that matter, claiming privacy, despite the families having asked for death certificates in many cases. And we know that it's suicide and many others, as was raised in the high-profile cases like Gavin Briggs and other guys who sadly lost their lives over this. And very often these are young men who are either in high-pressure jobs or very often in the army or veterans. And this isn't just affecting men as well. I've spoken to one woman who has her income inflated by over 1,000% because they just didn't look at her latest accounts. And for 3 or 4 years, they've been increasing her numbers based on a £70,000 salary that she hadn't earned for years and years and years. She was actually a student with virtually no money coming in. And then they took her to court over it and tried to seize her house. They can do all sorts of things. They can seize your passport. They can try and throw you in jail.
Right. So, let's come back to that. I tell you what, Joseph, let's go to some news headlines. We will come right back to that. This is really scary, horrific stuff. We'll be right back.
And now, dude, I have huge news. I knew it.
TNT Radio News.
For TNT, this is James O'Neill. The UK is facing a significant public health threat with the introduction of a powerful sedative, tranq dope, into the illegal drug market, which causes severe side effects. Admiral John Aquilino, the commander of the U.S. military in the Indo-Pacific, has identified Beijing's actions in the region as illegal and aggressive, pointing specifically to the Second Thomas Shoal as a critical area of tension.
Why not give TNT Radio a follow? We're on all major social platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Gab, and Getter. Help us get the word out as we cover the biggest topics of our time, right here on today's News Talk. TNT Radio. TNT Radio.
I'm here with journalist Joseph Robertson, and he wrote this actually brilliant piece in Epoch Times, and it is about the problems with the child maintenance service. But Joseph, some of the things that you're sharing with us today are deeply disturbing. You were just saying there that about a woman who had been billed, was it 1,000 times more?
This is 1,000%. So
1,000%. Yeah, that's it.
10 times more than what she was earning. And it was crazy number because they had miscalculated what her income actually was. She had been earning a very good wage earlier on in her career, but things had changed course, and she was now a student. She'd gone back into training for something, and there were, other things at play. She had, settled down with a new partner, etc. And they were still trying to charge her exactly the same as they had been years and years before, and actually adding inflation to her arrears without ever looking once at what her updated figures were, then prosecuting her and trying to throw her in jail over it. And in fact, I was at that court hearing. I actually heard one of the lawyers basically threatening her to increase it even more. So this is very heavy-handed stuff. This is bullying that's going on. This is systemic. This is trying to prey on the most vulnerable. And where you do, in some cases, get people to stand up to it, boy, they don't like it. They go after them with all kinds of stuff. And people I know who have had cases closed for years but spoken out about the CMS suddenly get them reopened. It's very interesting.
It is quite shocking. When I was actually investigating what had gone wrong with our case and sort of compiling a case for our local MP, one of the workers told me in a very sort of offhand remark that the problem was she actually, I'm going to literally quote as best as I can, best as I can remember what she said to me. She said, the problem is, imagine this, there's a room with lots and lots of checks, but none of those checks have names on. And that's why we're having problems finding where we need to send the money to. That is literally what a CSA worker said to me, Joseph. And this is a systemic, a long-term problem. Why they thought renaming it was going to change everything. Why do you think they did rename it? Was it to try and get rid of the sort of bad taste that everybody had about the agency?
Absolutely. I think there have been too many high-profile gaffes. There have been money laundering that people knew about. There have been all kinds of things coming out of that agency. This was all lower-level stuff compared to what we're looking at now. I mean, this kind of stuff has been going on to the point of suicides. What was happening under the CSA, I'm sure there was that as well, but there was also known corruption, which was of a different kind. Some agency workers had stolen money. There had been a couple of different bits and pieces going on, and I think they thought it was time for a refresh. And kind of fair enough if they got the structure right. But of course, what they really did is swept a lot of it under the rug. The Treasury didn't want to be implicated in a lot of this. There's a lot of factors at play, and of course, this ends up going all the way to the top. Consecutive ministers have known about a lot of the problems here, but no government really wants to touch it. And the point I would make is, of course, that it's not really a Labour problem or a Conservative problem. It's run under consecutive governments. It's been going for a long time. And I think it turned into this sort of monolithic kind of thing that they can't really get their heads around, and they just don't want to take admission because that's always going to fall on the government of the day.
I mean, one of the things that Mr. Windsor says in your article is that they believe they are above the law. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. There's something we're looking at the moment, which is what shouldn't happen in this country, which is a separation of powers. And they can actually override things that happen within the judiciary. They can go and get a court order without ever needing to present evidence. They can enforce charges without the magistrates ever being allowed to actually cross-check the numbers that are being given to the court. I've seen it multiple times when you go into these hearings. Essentially, people can submit evidence, the court will reject it because they say that the Child Maintenance Service has told them otherwise and they can't do anything. I've seen times where magistrates themselves want to actually, consider more about the details in the case, but they just can't because they're bound by new legislation which grants the CMS undue powers without any accountability. They can take passports off people, they can take houses off people. There was another case I covered. A veteran was literally a couple of days away from losing his house, and he was suffering from cancer. He was being treated for cancer. He hadn't earned money for a couple of years. They hadn't taken it into consideration. They were going to take his house from him. And fortunately, a judge in that case actually stepped in and said, look, this can't happen. We need to give them a reprieve. But very often that's just not the case. With these overarching powers, there's no accountability.
It is quite shocking. I mean, I do think this is a brilliant article, and I implore everybody to read this because it's very detailed. And obviously, you have people like Debbie Abrahams, Labour MP, and she's, added pressure to this as well. But I think, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating something you said, but there was a moment in the first part where we were talking where I was having problems with my earpiece, so I apologise about that. But I want to go back to the mortality rate because this is one of the things that I find most disturbing about this issue, and that is, you're talking about how there's a staggering 14.28 times higher than the national average for parents who are said to be in arrears, which is obviously a terrible state of affairs, because what you're revealing is that completely innocent parents are found to be in arrears. And that is a really desperate situation. And especially over the period that we've come through, where people were really isolated during lockdown as well. This must have had a really profound impact on people like Mr. Windsor.
Yeah, well, there's a fascinating statistic actually, which isn't in my piece, but in that data, which was collected by a brilliant individual called Brian Hudson, who's been doing a lot of work on this stuff, and he has really gone some depth. I'd encourage people to go and look at his research on this. And during lockdown, actually, what we saw is the rate of mortality went down. Now, it went down because, of course, no one could enforce collection during that period. So people weren't harassed as much by the CMS. Now, of course, you could say that this is, is this causality or correlation? Is this actually just, a profound coincidence? But I mean, having looked at the data, I don't see how you can have such a steep drop in mortality in a time when actually, supposedly mortality was going up in some areas of the country. And actually, what we're seeing is as soon as lockdown finished, that mortality rate has spiked all the way back up again. So there are some trends which are yet to be released. But looking at this data, I mean, over 93% of these deaths are from parents who were in arrears at the time, which suggests that at least the stress is getting to them. I'm not going to say all of them are suicides, because that would be insensitive, but there's certainly a higher risk of that possibility. And I think, having seen the pressure it puts on people, I mean, Lee himself, said to me that he had been feeling suicidal if it wasn't for his family. He might not be here now. And there are many such cases. I've spoken to people who are probably strong enough to get the story out there, but I think about all those voices who don't want the media attention and don't want to take on this massive civil service department who just treats them with contempt a lot of the time. And like you said in your own case, most of the parents don't even see this money at the other end. This isn't going to the children. This is going into the pockets of goodness knows who. I mean, there are organizations like Gingerbread, a charity which runs all of the child maintenance service propaganda, I would call it, who are essentially just ring-fenced and funded by the CMS in many ways.
Right.
I'm not going to say that as a provable statement, but you can see from looking at who works there and what they come out with that there's certainly no pushback on what the CMS are doing. They're just propagating the same message. So this is the big boys club.
Really, really very disturbing. It's a very disturbing story. Everybody, veteran threatened with inflated arrears after decade-long civil service battle. It's available online, Epoch Times, and written by Joseph Robertson. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Joseph. Such an important story. Please keep us updated with this, because this is a matter of great public interest, what is happening to people with this awful agency. Thank you so much. And take good care of yourself. Thank you for joining us. We'll be right back.